Welcome to the show where we focus on the African continent. Now this week we discuss urban growth and development. We speak to the World Bank Practice Manager for Urban, Rural and Social Development, Sameh Wahba. He shares his views with us. We get your views on the issues as well. And as always, we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Our guest on the show this week is Sameh Wahba, World Bank Practice Manager for Rural, Urban and Social Development. Since joining the World Bank in 2004, Sameh has worked on urban development, housing and infrastructure in Latin America, the Caribbean, the Middle East and the North African regions. While at the World Bank, he has managed numerous investment and technical assistance activities related to housing, land, urban upgrading, infrastructure, local economic development, municipal urban development issues, and disaster risk management in several countries. Let's take a look now at the context of the growth of urban development in Africa, African cities, before we go to the discussion.
The growth of cities is driven largely by the economic prosperity that they help create. But today, cities are growing at unprecedented and challenging speeds. What must be done to improve living conditions, especially in slums and hazard-prone areas? To create jobs? To expand the coverage and quality of basic services? The review offers a framework for city leaders to make tough decisions on development in their cities by providing diagnostic tools to identify policy distortions and analyze investment priorities.
Now time to go straight to our guest, Sameh Wahba. Thank you so much for joining us on the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Very exciting to speak with you at a time when many African cities are transforming and growing at a very rapid pace. Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. What's your perspective on growth in Africa?
Thank you, Julie, for having me. I think it's a very exciting moment to be in Africa today. I mean, the continent is urbanizing at a very fast pace, like you said. Basically, in the coming 15 years, the continent will add to its urban population the equivalent of Nigeria's population, and the urban population will double to about 1 billion, about 2040. So that's a lot of people coming to cities. I mean, we're talking technically about the equivalent of 1.2 million people coming into cities every month. So that's 1 million.
A huge challenge. Your experience so far, do you see ability, capacity to deal with this?
The challenge is definitely huge, but the opportunities as well are enormous, in the sense that urbanization and economic growth tend to go hand in hand. I mean, they're positively correlated. Urbanization brings about a process of structural transformation. The economy evolves into more formal sector jobs, manufacturing, industry, services, which creates opportunities for economic growth. But at the same time, like you said, the challenge is also huge, because if the city leaders, mayors, national government officials that oversee policies related to cities do not plan appropriately for accommodating this growth, do not put in the required investments in infrastructure and service delivery, then the resulting cities will be not able to benefit or offer the opportunities of better service delivery, better growth, better productivity for its population. And that will be the challenge.
We're in Nairobi right now, and the Kenya Urbanization Review report has some very interesting findings. Let's talk through some of the highlights of this report for you.
Definitely. Kenya is, interestingly enough, urbanizing with a positive correlation between urbanization and economic growth. They're going hand in hand. Except at the current level of GDP per capita of Kenya, you'd expect to see the country more urbanized. So in many ways, it's under-urbanized.
That is very interesting. It's not a perspective often shared.
Yeah, exactly, because usually what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, you reach the 40% milestone of urbanization at levels of GDP per capita of about 1,000. So Kenya is already over that, and it's a level of urbanization of 27%.
Okay.
And this means that the resources available to accompany that process of urbanization are higher than otherwise in comparator or peers in African countries. So that's an opportunity, but at the same time, the magnitude and the challenge are important because it's urbanizing at 4.3%. That's about a doubling of the urban population in Kenya every maybe 15 years. So today you have 12 million Kenyans living in urban areas. By 2030, it will be 24 million.
Wow.
And then, very shortly thereafter, you will have an entire new Kenya living in cities. So the level of investment as well is very, very important. I mean, we're talking about rates of access to sanitation that are in the range of 30%. So Kenya needs to quadruple its level of investment in sanitation in order to be able to reach the constitutional milestone of having everybody with access to water and sanitation by 2030.
Right, huge implications there as well for the health system.
Definitely.
And the burden that the health system has to bear. Looking at the typical dweller in a city in Kenya, who is that person? Who is that person? And how does the government and how do institutions that support development better serve the interests of that person? What does he or she need the most?
So the typical dweller in Kenya, or the median dweller, if you will, is somebody who's more likely than not to be living in informal housing, who is certainly going to be living in a rental accommodation rather than in a home ownership opportunity. And that is somebody who, with a 70% chance, will be either walking or taking the matatu to work. Our findings have showed that 70 to 72% of people in Nairobi commute to work either by walking. That's
and some long distances.
Exactly. That's about 48%. And then about 24% take the matatu to work. Now, the big challenge that faces the typical Kenyan who either walks or takes the matatu to work is that by walking, I mean, the amount of time or the amount of distance that you can walk in an hour is very limited. So with the current dispersal of job opportunities around the city, that person is only able to reach 8% of the job opportunities in the city. And the person who takes the matatu, because of the lack of road space in general, despite all the investment that has happened of late, and because of the limited public transportation system, that person is able to access only 14% of the jobs in the city. So the way land uses are configured in Nairobi, the way the public transportation system and the road infrastructure are configured, these are shutting Kenyans out of the labor market.
We did have plans for a massive effort to build up a mass transit system, transport system. Can you tell us how far that is moving along?
It is progressing. What is really important is you need a combination of both investment in public transportation, but a rethinking of land uses.
Okay.
So there are still a lot of measures that need to be done as far as redynamizing the land market in Nairobi, ensuring that vacant land can get developed with the appropriate land uses, the commercial, the industrial land uses that you'd want to see to create an agglomeration economy. And at the same time, you want also to rethink development controls. Lower densities tend to produce sprawl, and this increases the cost of service delivery significantly. So if you look at a pattern of density in Nairobi, there's a rather functional urban center, but subsequently thereafter the infrastructure really declines and the city spreads in significant places. So the typical Kenyan is left with two choices: either live in formal housing on affordable land at the periphery, and that's a lot of time spent into commuting, which is a lost productivity, or that person will end up overcrowding in unsanitary, underserviced settlements, irregular settlements in the center, slums, etc., and thereby will be trading off livability and environmental health for better proximity to where the jobs are.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
It's land planning and development when a city has already emerged and taken shape is such a huge challenge. Are there cities that have done this well and that we could take lessons from?
There are cities that have done it well, although more often than not with more proactive planning upfront. So whereas Nairobi, given that it's already a large city and a city that is expected by 2030 to be about 6 million people, so that's 1 million less than New York is today, it will require more investment, and I think the level of investment that has been occurring of late suggests that policymakers' attention to Nairobi is important. The issue of urban finance is going to come to the rise. Nairobi leads the pack on own source revenue mobilization. I mean, it gets a lower transfer per capita as part of the devolution system. But that helped the county to go and think about its own revenue mobilization and increase the revenue sources so it can improve its service delivery. But also, don't forget, there are a lot of other secondary cities where the challenge has still not taken place with that level of magnitude, and therefore, with proactive planning today, with the level of resources that are available, and with a focused investment on capacity building to accompany the devolution process, these cities can get it right.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. And I want to expand a little bit and look at a few other African cities. I just say a few names to you of African cities and tell me what you think. Lagos.
That's a major metropolis with, very, very serious inefficiencies in the land market. However, in recent years have been, there has been much more investments and policies aiming to help the city take off to its full potential. I think the city has a level of magnitude of the informal development challenge that really requires, a proactive housing and land policy at the city level. I think Lagos, probably just like Cairo and several metropolis in East Asia, are cities that face a magnitude of informality and a challenge of affordable housing at scales that we don't see in Kenya, we don't see in other places, in the sense, of the sheer numbers.
Yes. So big, huge challenge there to deal with. Johannesburg.
Been working more closely with the mayors. I've seen the mayor's vision within the African mayors context. We've got several African mayors, like the mayor of Joburg and the mayor of Dakar, etc., who are basically leading, the process of exchange of policies between mayors and really rising the profiles of local government. Again, the challenge is the spatial mismatch in the city. I mean, where people live from where jobs are. I think this is the most serious challenge. So, and that requires both a dual intervention on land uses, because it's not just enough to build public transportation between where the jobs are and where people are. I mean, you need to start rethinking about creating job opportunities closer to where people live and vice versa. Which
I hear Harare has achieved very well. The planning is meticulous, I'm told, in Harare. Kigali.
Kigali is a city I've just come back from there. I think there's a real concerted planning effort taking place in Kigali. There's probably the most functional land registration system in the continent, which therefore enables to protect property rights, ensure an appropriate level of planning, and at the same time there are much better development controls than you see in many other places, in the sense of trying to ensure that flood-prone areas are not settled upon, and that reduces the magnitude of the problem to fix later on.
Okay. Yeah. Addis Ababa.
Addis Ababa is a city we're working with them very closely. We're helping them strengthen their resilience by looking at a host of factors in the city that encompass vulnerability to natural hazards, climate change effects, economic shocks, etc. So the mayor is really leading the team and the city to improve service delivery. The city has come recently into a challenge related to its new master plan with the challenge of basically land development at the periphery. And I think it is an important issue for the city to address and resolve in order to ensure that basically the city can grow at to create economic opportunities. The very interesting fact of Addis, where we worked, is that in the first 10 years, so basically we looked at the past 25 years, the first 10 years Addis has grown, so both population density and the land expansion at a rate that got tripled in the subsequent 10 years. Right. So the city suddenly was growing at reasonable densities and then ended up sprawling very rapidly. So we've done an analysis of available land area in proximity of the city center, and there's a lot of opportunities to densify and make the city very efficient, so thereby reducing the pressure on expansion at the periphery and helping create a city that's denser, more compact, but at the same time more livable, right, because of the investments they have been doing in public transportation, like the light rail.
Let's go up north now to Cairo.
That's Cairo is the epitome of the institutional problem that you come across, actually, as well in Lagos. The relationship between the municipal level and the state level. So Cairo, the Greater Cairo Metropolitan Region, basically comprises of 5 different jurisdictions. There are 5 governorates, so it has 5 bosses. And then, obviously, national government also ends up having a lot of interventions that they plan and finance in Cairo. Again, a city that that had a footprint up until the 1980s, high levels of density. But then, since the 1980s, with the implementation of new town policies, basically has sprawled significantly into the desert hinterland, because they needed to protect the agricultural land, so created a new axis of development of the city. There's a lot of infrastructure to do, but much more importantly is the institutional coordination.
Looking at Africa and you're Egyptian, are you optimistic about our continent? In the work that you do, focusing on cities, do you see the hope? You've talked a lot about the opportunities. What do you feel about the continent?
There is a lot of hope. I mean, I don't want to underestimate the challenge by being optimistic, but at the same time, we're noticing really from our exchanges with policymakers that the issue of urbanization is really capturing their attention because of the link with structural transformation, because of the impetus it can have on creating opportunities for economic growth due to agglomeration and improved productivity. I think policymakers are cognizant of the challenge that faces land market, land information systems, the challenge that faces the connectivity, the infrastructure, and then the financing challenge. It's not an easy challenge to address, but with the level of growth and with the need to diversify in many of the African countries that have traditionally relied on oil for their revenues, and now with the changes in oil prices, are starting to see the opportunities that urbanization can afford them to diversify their economy and grow.
I'll ask you now to look into your camera and deliver a message, perhaps specifically to policymakers when it comes to what we need to do for our cities moving forward, and to the people living in the cities. How can we get the best out of our cities and be part of the growth and development as well, please?
Definitely. Thank you, Julie. I think for the policymakers, there are 3 very important priorities. One is looking at the planning dimension, land markets, the way they function, property registration systems, but thinking also about the land uses within the city and how the city can grow in a way that makes it compact, livable, well serviced by public transportation, so that it can create job opportunities, affordable housing opportunities for the population, and reduce the pressure on slums. The second one is the connectivity, the connective infrastructure, both for mobility but also for water, sanitation, and power. And the third is the financing challenge, how to finance that infrastructure. And that's not going to be official development aid. That's not going to be just transfers from central to local government. This needs to be about the mobilization of local resources. It's about the empowerment of central government to local government to mobilize the revenue, but also thinking about all the innovative approaches to helping finance cities, such as putting them on the path of creditworthiness through improved municipal finances, and also thinking about capturing the land value increment from urban infrastructure so they can contribute to financing infrastructure. So it's planning, connecting, and financing, and it's in this sequence. It's not financing first. So that's the important one. For the citizens, I think it's very critical that you participate. So citizen engagement is a key priority, taking part, in contributing to the planning of the city, voicing your concerns about service delivery, helping local government officials understand the type of the challenges that citizens face so that they can improve the level of service delivery. This is something we're working on in all our projects, citizen engagement and a feedback loop into the service delivery mechanisms. Obviously the entrepreneurship, job creation, is going to be the foundation on which the cities grow. And in the continent, with the dynamism that exists in the continent, with the creativity, with the innovation, even though the infrastructure might be lacking, even though institutions need better coordination, I think the sheer dynamism that exists in the continent is going to ensure that this challenge will be met and cities will evolve into being dynamic places, prosperous places, livable places, but most importantly, inclusive spaces as well. Thank you.
An exciting thing to hear. Thank you. What a good note to end on.
Thank
it's
you
a
very
pleasure.
much.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
It's interesting to see how fast African urban areas are growing, how cities are developing. The challenge, however, is to ensure that we end extreme poverty and ensure that sustainable development and proper planning is effected across all our urban areas. Something you can do with regard to this is to plan and organize in your neighborhood groups and communities. Create forums to make your voices heard. That way, you have group power and influence to take your ideas to policymakers, to county governments, to national governments, so that you end up living in an area that indeed you're happy to be in. Safe environments, good infrastructure, and much more. So organize yourselves. Time now to get your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, in what ways can citizen participation contribute to good governance? Newton Debu says, by emphasizing to citizens the importance of voting through proper civic education exercises being conducted in the grassroots levels.
My name is Nasiri Tendegu. I'm watching Africa Leadership Dialogue from Mombasa County. Good governance can be brought by citizens engaged in public discussion, also citizens to be engaged in public programs and even voting process.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Thank you so much for sharing your views on the issues. We always appreciate your feedback. Let's keep the conversations going on social media as well. Time now for Africa's Top 10.
This week on Africa's Top 10, we feature the fastest growing cities in Africa. The factors considered in ranking the 10 fastest growing cities in Africa were the population growth from 2010 to 2025 and GDP rate per annum from 2008 to 2025. This is according to the African Development Bank. Starting us off at number 10 is Algiers with an estimated population growth of 28.4% and a GDP growth of 4.6%. Coming in at number 9 is Alexandria with a possible GDP growth of 5.2% and an estimated population growth of 28.7%. Positioned at number 8 is Kano. The second largest city in Nigeria recorded a possible GDP growth of 6.2% with an estimated population growth of 49%. Taking the number 7 spot is Khartoum. Located at the confluence of the White and Blue Nile, Khartoum recorded an estimated population growth of 53.8% and a GDP growth of 5.5%. Slotted in at number 6 is Lagos. Having the largest metropolitan area in Africa, Lagos recorded a possible GDP growth of 6.4% and an estimated population growth of 49.5%. Luanda takes the number 5 spot with an estimated GDP growth of 6.3% and a population growth of 69.2%. Positioned at number 4 is Kinshasa. The largest urban center in Africa recorded an estimated population growth of 71.8% and a GDP growth of 6.3%. At number 3 is Addis Ababa. Often referred to as the political center of Africa, Addis Ababa's GDP and population growth is projected to grow by 6.8% and 62.4% respectively. Coming in at number 2 is Nairobi. Founded originally as a rail city, Nairobi recorded an estimated population growth of 77.4% and a GDP growth of 6.4%. At number 1 is Dar es Salaam. Translated as the residence of peace, Dar es Salaam's population and GDP growth is estimated to grow by 85.2% and 6.5% respectively. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
As always, we end with an African proverb. This one is simple and short, but very powerful. The lion's power lies in our fear of him. So who are the African lions? Which cities are emerging that will command economic growth and development, that will control the movement forward for the African continent, from Johannesburg to Lagos, Nairobi, Cairo? Who will be the greatest lion? Interesting discussions to have. Blessings to you and blessings